crept slowly across the window of the old laboratory, carrying a chill so delicate that it felt like an unseen hand brushing the back of the neck. The wind tapped the glass again and again, soft but insistent, almost as if asking permission to witness something that had never happened before in the history of mankind. In the wide, shadow-filled room, a young man leaned over a stone table. His body was thin, his face pale, his eyes red from days without sleep. Yet within those tired eyes, a spark glowed, small, stubborn, and burning like a coal refusing to die even when darkness tried to smother it. He was Victor Frankenstein, a man who believed that humanity's greatest boundary was not the sky, but the fear of what lay beyond understanding. He inhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with deliberate control. Each exhale released exhaustion, but every inhale drew back his ambition. Among the hum of machinery and the faint crackling of cables brushing one another, his heart pounded like a war drum heard by no one but himself. Before Victor lay the figure he had built, a large, strong body without breath or soul, pieces of life once separate, united by his stubborn will. "Tonight you will awaken," he whispered to the lifeless form. His voice was hoarse, nearly broken, yet unwavering in its intent. Candles trembled in a distant corner as though frightened. Their flickering light danced along the walls, casting shadows that moved like tiny creatures running from whatever was about to unfold. The air was thick with the smell of metal, dust, and unfamiliar chemicals, an aroma understood only by those bold enough to tamper with the fragile line between life and death. Victor's movements were slow, soft, and precise. He tightened bolts, adjusted wires, and checked the pulse of his machines. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that tonight he was touching something far beyond the confines of the world he knew. Outside, the wind hissed, as if the sky itself disapproved of a man's attempt to transcend his mortal boundaries. But Victor was no ordinary man. He was a dreamer with an unbreakable will, a seeker of truth who never bowed to fear. Gently, he placed his hand on the creature's chest, the chest that had no heartbeat but was heavy with potential. "If you open your eyes, the world will change forever," he whispered. Lightning slashed the sky, illuminating the room for a heartbeat. The bright flash reflected off glass tubes, clear liquids, and half-broken metal instruments. For that one sharp moment, Victor saw his own reflection, a man who looked older than his years, worn down yet consumed by purpose, someone who had given everything for a single ambition. He had indeed lost much: time with family, sleep, food, health, all traded for the whisper that urged him on. Give life to the dead, unravel the greatest secret of existence. Rain began to fall heavily. Each drop struck the roof and window like tiny needles, creating a rhythm that filled the room, something between a warning and a prayer. Victor's gaze returned to the creature. Its face was rough, its skin pale and grayish, lined with stitches like a map of forgotten journeys. But to Victor, this was not a monster. It was a creation, a triumph, an answer, a possibility. He inhaled sharply and pulled the main switch. Instantly, the room roared with electricity. Silver blue light danced across wires, leaping from metal to skin. The air crackled, Vibrating with an unnatural hum, the entire laboratory glowed with a harsh brilliance that made every object seem alive. Victor's heart raced, not with fear, but with hope. He scanned the creature from head to toe. At first, nothing moved. It was still a lifeless form drowned in an ocean of light. Then, a finger twitched. A movement so minuscule it might have been imagined, like a blade of grass bending under the first breeze, like a flower petal beginning to open. Victor gasped. His eyes widened. He stepped back, trembling, caught between disbelief and triumph. "Wake up," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of anticipation. The next movement was clearer. The hand trembled, the arm tensed, the muscles, gathered from different lives, shuddered together like an orchestra learning its first note. "Beautiful," Victor breathed, tears blurring his vision. Then came the moment that froze time. The creature's eyes slowly opened. They were not human eyes, not eyes that understood, not eyes that had ever seen the world. They were the eyes of someone forced into existence, eyes suspended between confusion and infinite sorrow, eyes that felt older than the body they inhabited. Victor stepped back, startled. A shiver crawled through him, not because of the creature, but because of what he had done. "Do you understand me?" he asked softly. The creature did not respond, but its chest rose, barely, as if struggling to inhale its very first breath, a breath heavy with a lifetime of pain. The room fell silent. The storm outside dimmed to a distant murmur. Only Victor and his creation remained. The creature attempted to lift its head. Its movements were stiff, slow, like someone unfamiliar with the weight of their own body. Its lips parted slightly. No words, no moan, just hollow gesture that felt like a silent cry. The sound that followed was not a voice, only a broken rasp of air, raw and trembling, the sound of someone who did not yet know how to live. It pierced Victor's chest, because it was not the sound of a monster. It was the sound of a giant infant, forced into life with pain rather than love. Rain intensified. Lightning rumbled like a furious sky. Shadows quivered at the edges of the laboratory. Victor pressed himself against the wall. The creature struggled to stand, tall, heavy, unbalanced, but standing itself was a miracle. Yet for Victor, that miracle now felt wrong. Behind the triumph was something darker, not from the creature, but from himself. Ambition, ego, the hunger to become a creator. Now he faced the result, life that never wished to exist. Victor's news weakened. He collapsed to the floor. Lightning flashed again, revealing the creature towering above him with hollow eyes, seeing its creator terrified by his own creation. That was the night everything changed. The night a new life entered the world not for hope, but for a future tangled with rejection, longing, pursuit, and tragedy. The night Victor learned, creating life is not the greatest challenge. Living with the consequences is. And on that night, his consequences had only just begun. The night after Victor's creation opened its eyes, the world seemed to fall into an eerie, unnatural silence. Even the wind, usually restless at the edge of the mountains, held its breath, as if it knew something sacred and forbidden had taken place. The laboratory that once echoed with clattering metal and crackling electricity had grown still, Yet that stillness carried the weight of something alive, something observing. Victor stood in the middle of that vast chamber, staring at the door where the creature had escaped. His mind wrestled with 1,000 conflicting thoughts: fear, pride, disbelief, guilt, but none of them sat still long enough to be understood. All he felt, truly, was the lingering presence of something he could no longer control. He kept replaying the moment the creature breathed for the first time, the sudden expansion of its chest, the rattling inhale, like air scraping through a cavern, the flutter of eyelids revealing eyes that seemed too aware, too human, too sorrowful. No sound in his entire life had ever terrified him more. Still, Victor forced himself to move through the room. He inspected the operating table, the discarded instruments, the marks left by the creature's hands as it tried to steady itself in confusion. Each detail cut him with silent accusation. The monster was gone, but the consequences remained. Victor tried to push away the thought of what his creation might encounter outside his laboratory. Would it understand the cold, hunger, pain? Would people run from it, scream, throw stones, fire? Or would it learn to hate? He stepped outside, into the biting wind. The night sky hung heavy and swollen with clouds, swallowing the moonlight. Snow crunched under his boots as he crossed the courtyard. Uneven footprints leading toward the forest told him exactly where the creature had fled. Yet Victor could not bring himself to follow. Not tonight. Not with the image of those mournful eyes still haunting him. The creature, meanwhile, wandered into the darkness with a heart that didn't have a name. Fear? Loneliness? Confusion? It felt all of them, swirling like cold fog inside its chest. Each breath burned as it seeped into lungs that had never known the world until mere hours ago. It pressed forward through the forest, its massive hands brushing past branches that hissed against its skin. Its body moved awkwardly, uncertain of its own weight. Every sound startled it. The snap of a twig, distant hoots of an owl, even the wind sighing between trees. The world was too big, too sharp, too loud. But the creature moved anyway, driven by an instinct buried deeper than memory. It found a stream and knelt beside it, its reflection rippling on the surface. For the first time, it saw itself fully, a patchwork of mismatched flesh, stitched scars crossing its face like cold rivers, eyes too bright beneath heavy lids. It didn't recoil in horror. It didn't understand horror, but it did understand sadness. The reflection trembled every time a tear touched the water. Something inside it whispered that this face did not belong to the world, or perhaps the world did not belong to this face. Still, it touched the water gently, fascinated by the sensation. Drops ran across its fingers like tiny lives, fragile and temporary. The monster cupped the water and let it fall again, watching as if it expected the world to talk back. But nothing did. Back in the laboratory, Victor lit a single lamp. Its flickering glow carved shadows across the floor, shadows that stretched into monstrous shapes, taunting him. He sat at his desk and opened his journal, hands trembling. His notes were filled with diagrams, theories, and formulas scrawled in a frenzy of ambition.
Now they looked like pages from a nightmare. He dipped his pen into ink, hesitating before writing the truth. I have created life. He paused. The next line felt heavier, and I fear it. Ink smeared as his hand shook. He imagined the creature wandering somewhere in the dark woods, alone and unprepared. He imagined what it might do if frightened, how its enormous limbs could cause harm without intention, how a simple scream from a stranger could push it into violence. Victor pressed a palm over his face, forcing himself to breathe. He muttered, "Perhaps it will perish in the cold," though even he didn't believe it. That body was built from strength beyond human limits, its heartbeat with unnatural endurance. Cold alone would not kill it. What he feared more was the world's reaction, and the creature's reaction to the world. He closed his journal with a thud. Tonight, he could do nothing but wait. The creature walked until its legs became heavy. Dawn crept slowly, bleeding pale light through the branches. Snow clung to its skin, forming frost along its brow. It didn't know the meaning of morning, only that the sky was changing and its body ached. Then, through the thinning mist, it saw smoke rising. A cottage. Small, quiet, warm. Drawn by instinct, the creature approached cautiously. Through a window, it saw a man, elderly and blind, sitting near a fireplace. His hands worked over the strings of a worn instrument, producing soft, trembling melodies. The sound pulled the creature closer. It sat beside the trees, listening. Something inside it tightened painfully, not in fear, but in longing. The notes from the old man's instrument were gentle, almost like a voice calling out to a soul that had never been spoken to before. The monster leaned against a tree and closed his eyes. For the first time since its creation, it felt calm. Victor, meanwhile, stood at the edge of the forest at sunrise, torn between dread and responsibility. His breath formed clouds in the cold morning air as he stared into the shadows. He whispered to no one, "I must find him." But the forest whispered nothing back. Only the wind answered, carrying the faint echo of a melody played by a blind man in a distant cottage and the quiet heartbeat of something not quite human, yet desperate to belong.
Dawn crept slowly between the trees, casting pale streaks of light across the snow-covered ground. The forest still breathed cold air, yet a faint warmth drifted from a distance, the warmth of a small, lonely cottage where thin smoke curled upward from its chimney. And near that cottage, the creature born from Victor Frankenstein's ambition sat silently, its back pressed against the trunk of an old tree, its body trembling not only from the chill, but from something deeper, a strange feeling of peace. It listened to music. Soft notes from a modest stringed instrument played by the blind man inside the cottage slipped out through a small window. The melody wandered gently through the air, uncertain but warm, like hands searching through darkness, hoping to find something long lost. The creature closed its eyes. For the first time since opening them in a laboratory that smelled of metal and blood, it felt calm. The sensation was unfamiliar, yet comforting. Every note plucked by the old man reached into the emptiness inside its chest, a hollow space untouched by anything until now. In that emptiness, the music became a thin beam of light. After listening for a long while,
The creature curled its large arms around itself, a clumsy gesture, yet filled with longing. It did not understand the meaning of warmth, but it knew it desired it. It did not understand companionship, but something in the music pulled it closer. It wanted to enter the cottage, yet it did not dare. It knew its appearance was not something the world would welcome easily. When it saw its reflection in the river the night before, it did not comprehend the concept of ugliness, but it understood difference. It understood that it did not belong. And the world was rarely kind to what it did not understand. Inside the cottage, the blind man, Devries, continued playing his instrument. His fingers moved slowly but surely, as if each note was a small journey he had to walk. Every sound resembled gentle footsteps crossing the silence that surrounded his home. Devries knew he was not alone. He had heard the heavy footsteps outside since early morning, a deep breath, the soft rumble of someone or something struggling to understand the world. Yet he was not afraid. After years without sight, he had learned that what sounded frightening was not always harmful. "If you're hungry," he murmured, still playing, "I have bread and a little soup." The creature lifted its head. The words struck its chest like the first bright ray breaking through pitch darkness. It didn't understand all human speech, but it grasped one thing clearly. Those words were meant for it. It rose slowly. The ground shivered faintly beneath its weight as it moved closer, its large heart beating harder than ever. Fear and hope flickered inside it, two feelings it had never held together before. When it reached the door, it lifted one heavy, scarred hand and tapped gently, terrified of breaking the fragile wood. Tap, tap, tap. Devries smiled. "You came." Without sight, the old man could not see the shadow towering in the doorway, but he sensed its presence, powerful, chaotic, but filled with need. "Come in," he said softly. The door creaked open. The firelight spilled onto the creature's uneven skin, revealing scars, stitched lines, and mismatched tones. Yet the creature stepped inside anyway, its posture lowered to avoid hitting the frame. Warmth from the hearth washed over it like the first embrace of its life. Meanwhile, far away, Victor stood gripping a small map, his breath uneven, not from the cold, but from the guilt gnawing at him like an invisible hand. He knew he had to find his creation. He knew he had to face it, but he had no idea what he would say when the time came. Every shadow between the trees made his heart pound. He imagined the creature attacking villagers, falling into hunters' traps, or seeking revenge, yet behind all his fears was a possibility even more terrifying. The creature might now possess a will of its own. And if it had free will, Victor no longer controlled anything. "I hope I'm not too late," he whispered. His steps pressed deeper into the snow, each crunching sound echoing like the tick of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Back in the cottage, the creature sat on the floor near the fire, its large hands trembling as it tried to reach for the warm bowl of soup Devries offered. Its fingers were unsteady. It had never held anything fragile before. But the old man only chuckled softly, a sound entirely free of fear. "You have big hands, but that's not a bad thing," Devries said gently. The creature lowered its head, feeling something spread quietly inside its chest, not warmth from the fire, not hunger, acceptance. A feeling foreign yet sweet. It wanted to speak, wanted to form words, wanted to respond, but its lips were stiff, its tongue heavy. and the sound that escaped was a low, resonant growl that made the wooden table tremble. Still, Devries did not retreat. He did not cry out. He did not fear. He only smiled, as if the sound was as natural as the wind knocking against the window. "Slowly," he said. "Every creature needs time to learn." The creature closed its eyes. For the first time since its creation, it felt more than just an experiment. It felt like something worth teaching, worth giving a chance. Outside the cottage, the forest held its silence tightly, as though unwilling to disturb the fragile connection forming between two very different souls. But that peace would not last, for beyond the quiet trees, Victor Frankenstein was drawing near, and their next encounter would change everything. For the Creator, the creation, and a world unprepared for either one.
The night wind drifted down from the mountains, carrying with it a cold, damp scent that slipped through the trees. The forest that had felt calm earlier that morning now seemed different, dark, dense, and as though it was waiting for something yet unseen. The moonlight that occasionally peeked between the clouds cast thin silver lines across the forest floor, just enough to guide the steps of a lone figure moving with quiet unease. Victor Frankenstein. His body was slightly hunched from exhaustion, yet his eyes remained sharp with determination. He followed the faint traces of large footprints left behind in the snow. Each one made his heart pound harder, like a hammer striking the weight of his own guilt. Sometimes he stopped, touching the edges of the prints with trembling fingers, making sure he was still on the right path. He knew these prints belonged to his creation. There was no doubt. "Closer," he whispered softly, but the words brought him no comfort. Beyond the trees, the small cabin where Devries lived stood with warm firelight leaking out through the cracks of its windows. From afar, Victor saw it as a safe point in the middle of a sea of darkness. He didn't know that inside the cabin something was changing, something that might make him question everything he had done since that fateful night of the experiment. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was unlike any previous night. The fire danced gently, spreading warm light across the old wooden walls. On the table, an empty bowl of soup lay untouched, but the creature still held on to its rim as if trying to understand its shape. Devries sat in his rocking chair, smiling softly in the creature's direction. "You learn quickly," Devries said gently. The creature lifted its head, its pale but deep eyes reflected the firelight, creating a gaze that could not be called human, yet not truly wild. Something was growing behind that gaze: curiosity, respect, perhaps even comfort. It tried moving its lips again. A heavy, rough, broken sound crawled out of its throat. "Duh, eh, z." Devries straightened, startled but delighted. "You're trying to say my name?" The creature nodded slowly, though its movement was stiff. "Devries." Now the sound was slightly clearer, though still coarse like stones scraping together. Devries chuckled softly, not mocking, but genuinely proud. "Very good, very good." The creature lowered its head, feeling a strange warmth, different from the fire's heat. It was the warmth of praise, and it had never known that such a feeling could make its chest tremble. "I don't know who you really are, but I know you are not just a monster." The creature lifted its face. It didn't fully understand the meaning of that word, monster, but the tone in Devries' voice told it the old man meant no harm.
It sounded like a description, not a condemnation. Devries added, "You have a heart. I can hear it." The creature placed a hand against its chest as if checking whether something truly beat beneath the skin and stitching, and it did. Its heart beat strongly, stronger than ever. Meanwhile, Victor was nearing the cabin. He paused behind a large tree trunk, trying to catch his breath. From a distance, he could see a large shadow moving inside, too large to belong to any human. His body stiffened, and for a moment he felt transported back to the night the creature first opened its eyes. He felt the same fear, the same guilt, and the same simmering anger toward himself. "What have I done?" he whispered, but he couldn't turn back. He needed to see the creature. He needed to be sure the world hadn't been broken by his actions. Inside, Devries spoke again. "You may stay here if you wish." The creature lifted its head quickly, almost like a child hearing long-awaited words. Devries smiled and leaned forward slightly. "Not many people come to this little place. My son used to visit, but he's been gone for a long time." His tone dipped for a moment, but he quickly regained his warmth. "I don't know if you understand everything I'm saying, but I know you need a safe place." The creature looked at the fire, then at Devries again. Slowly, it nodded. This was the first home that accepted him, the first voice that didn't scream at the sight of him, the first smile that didn't hurt him. But before that moment of quiet could become true peace, something happened. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Someone knocked on the door. The creature flinched, its body tensed, breath heavy like a cornered animal. Devries rose slowly, gripping his cane. "Calm down. It might just be a visitor." But the creature already knew. It recognized the rhythm of that knock. It wasn't the knock of a stranger, not a casual knock, not a hesitant one. It was the knock of someone searching, someone who knew, someone who had followed its trail. The creature stepped back into the corner, its shadow swelling across the walls, breath echoing like a small storm in the cabin. The door opened slowly. Moonlight spilled in, and standing at the threshold was a man whose face it recognized, though it had seen him only once. The first face it had ever seen. A face once twisted with fear as it looked upon him. Victor Frankenstein. The creature froze, Devries froze, and the world seemed to stop for one long, cold second. Victor stepped inside, eyes wide with terror, regret, and layered guilt. His voice cracked as he whispered, I found him." And so, a new chapter began.
Night descended slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the tension filling the air. The snow that had fallen politely since noon now tapped delicately against the roof of the cabin. Victor remained motionless for a long time after Devries's torch vanished, letting the brief warmth in his chest fade slowly. The silence felt strange, almost unnatural, and within that silence, Victor understood one thing with certainty. His creation was near, not hiding, not fleeing, but approaching. Since Chapter 4, since that encounter with Devries, Victor had sensed the signs. A shadow lingering too long behind the trees, the snap of a branch that didn't match the direction of the wind, and worst of all, the nights when he woke abruptly, convinced he was being watched. That feeling was never wrong. The creature always left something behind, faint footprints or small wooden carvings shaped like fractured pieces of a face. Not a threat, but more like a summons.
And tonight, the air thickened. Victor rose from the wooden chair that felt colder than before. He walked toward the window and lifted the faded cloth hanging there. Darkness swallowed the forest. No wind, no animals, only the white expanse reflecting moonlight, making the world feel detached from reality. Then he saw it. In the distance, a tall figure stood motionless between the pines, not moving, not hiding, not running. It was intentionally visible. The silhouette was impossible to mistake for a normal human, and even though the distance was too far to see its face, Victor knew the creature was staring directly at him. His chest tightened, not from fear, not from anger, but from something far more complicated, like recognizing a piece of himself he had long abandoned. The creature didn't approach. It simply waited, waiting for Victor to decide whether he would continue running like all the years before or finish everything tonight. Victor put on his worn, oversized coat, grabbed his cracked leather gloves, and reached for the torch beside the small fireplace. It flared to life with a soft crackle. Orange light danced across the walls, revealing every mark of time he had tried so hard to forget. Before opening the door, he paused. He thought of Devries, their short conversation, how a hunter whose life was built on death was the one begging Victor not to kill. The irony lingered in Victor's mind, but he understood. Devries saw the monster in Victor just as clearly as he saw the monster in the creature. And somehow, that made Victor move more carefully. When the door swung open, the night's cold struck him like a pale hand gripping his face. He tightened his hold on the torch and began walking toward the figure in the trees. Snow crunched beneath his boots, each step feeling like a retreat into his past. The laboratory, the forbidden experiment, the night the world changed. As he approached, the shape grew clearer. Still no defensive posture, no threat, but just a long silence, one that made Victor feel guilt, far heavier than any scream could make. Hello? Victor's voice cracked, nearly swallowed by the cold. The creature finally moved. Slowly, carefully, as though afraid to scare away the only source of warmth that had approached it in years. Victor, it said, its voice deep and coarse, yet lacking the rage it once held. I knew you would come. Victor swallowed. I wasn't sure, but I felt this was the time. The creature lowered its head slightly, a gesture no monster in any storybook would make. It wasn't a bow to attack, it was the bow of a child trying not to frighten its father. Why are you searching for me again? Victor asked. Because I'm tired. I don't want to run anymore, neither do you. Victor had no reply, because the creature was right. They walked side by side through the snowy valley without speaking. Victor's torch was the only warm color in the endless white. Eventually, they reached the edge of a frozen lake, a quiet, still place, like a space suspended between life and death. There, the creature stopped. Victor, I never wanted to hurt you, not once. I just wanted to understand why I was born. The question hit Victor harder than the wind, because he knew there was no answer good enough to undo what he had done. I created you because I could, because I wanted to feel like God. That was my greatest mistake. The creature closed its eyes. I am no God. I'm not human, not even a complete creation. No, you're more than that. You are alive. I never had the right to decide what your life should mean. The creature's eyes glistened, something rarely seen on a body so immense. I killed not because I wished to, but because I never knew how to be right. We're the same, Victor replied. Neither of us knew. The wind swept across the lake's surface, whispering like distant ghosts. They faced each other, but for the first time, without blame. "If so," the creature murmured, trembling, "what will you do to me now?" Victor didn't answer immediately. All the years of chasing, the hatred, the fear, suddenly felt small, unimportant, no longer relevant. "Nothing," he said finally. "I will do nothing to you." The creature lowered its head. "But you hunted me for years." "I hunted you because I feared admitting my own mistake. That is the worst reason to hunt anyone." The creature lowered its head. "Then what is the end of our story, Victor?" Victor raised the torch, letting its light reveal the creature's face, a face once terrifying, now simply sad, like someone longing to go home. "I don't want to end your life, but if you wish to end your suffering, I will stay with you." The creature was silent for a long time. Then it said, "I don't want to die. I just want to stop hurting anyone." Then we stop together. The frozen lake witnessed the two of them, creator and creation, sitting side by side. They talked until the torch flickered low. About the past, about life they didn't understand, about choices that should have been different, but were now too late to change. But they realized something. Even if they couldn't go back, they could stop destroying themselves. When dawn broke over the mountains, the creature stood. Its massive form moved gently. "I will go far. Somewhere the world cannot see me. I don't know what I will do, but I will learn to live." Victor smiled faintly, for the first time in years. "If someday you need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." The creature nodded. Then, with heavy yet hopeful steps, it walked away, becoming a silhouette, a dot, a part of the vast, mysterious world. Victor watched until it vanished. For the first time since that lightning struck its lifeless body alive, he felt at peace. Back in the cabin, Victor wrote, "He is no monster. He was born from human fear and raised without guidance. May anyone who reads these notes someday understand that he once tried to be good." It was the last thing he wrote that morning, and outside, beyond the frost-covered trees, the world began to move again, slowly, coldly, yet still full of hope. The end.